biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And so this series, Does the Bible Tell You So? And I've decided to do a mini series within this series, if you will. I want to talk about some of the highlights pertaining to marriage in the Bible. So this is the second in this series, and the first four, I'm looking at the four primary passages that people turn to help them define biblical marriage. So the first one was on Genesis 1:28, about procreating, and this claim that procreation is made for marriage, which is undermined by chapter 16 in Genesis, when Abraham forces himself upon Hagar and forces her to have a child. That is certainly not within marriage. And this is the patriarch of all patriarchs. So I'm pretty sure that we can challenge that assumption or that claim based on saying God made procreation for marriage. Actually, no. And in fact, if that one doesn't work for you because you say, well, Sarah and Abraham weren't trusting God, then 2 generations later, Jacob does the same thing. So saying that procreation is for marriage isn't actually backed up by the Bible itself. Okay, so today I want to look at Genesis 2:24, a whole chapter later, because it's the second of the four. The other two are Matthew 19:4-6, and then Ephesians 5:31 and 32. I'll talk about those next in the next two videos. So, and the reason that Genesis 2:24 is one of the biblical marriage passages is because of how most people have it translated for them. So this is how it's normally translated. Genesis 2:24 in the New Revised Standard Version says, "Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh." Genesis 2:24. A man leaves his parents, gets married, and they have sex. So that this verse is used to say that sex outside of marriage, right, or sex before marriage, is inappropriate, and it's also used on some level to say one man, one woman. Okay, so so let me back up then and get into why is it that people that I think there's something different to see going on in Genesis 2:24, and that is it isn't talking about marriage, just like Genesis 1:28 isn't actually talking about the institution of marriage. This doesn't even have marriage language in it. But wait, Dr. Bird, you just read a man leaves his parents and clings to his wife. Yes, that's what the English translations all say. They all imply that this woman is his wife. But that's not going on in the Hebrew. And the reason this matters to me is because the translators importing this marriage language makes us think about, well, they're already married before they have sex, and that's not really true because there's no ceremony that takes place between verse 23 and 24. 23 when they're both created, and then the man's like, hey, this is called woman, for out of man she's taken. And then the next verse, it's man and wife, right? So there's no marriage that takes place between those two verses. But also, I mean, if this is pairing up and having children and doing a family thing, if that's what we call marriage, then why is it a problem to call it marriage here? Because our own ideas about marriage today are quite different from their ideas about marriage. And I would really like us to be able to look at what's going on in these biblical contexts and these stories and scriptures themselves. Let them speak for themselves a little bit before we then go and apply it to marriage. So for instance, if I were to read that same verse, but honoring what's in the Hebrew, listen to how it reads and see if there's a difference to you between what I read and what I'm about to read, which is, therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his woman, and they become one flesh. Is there a difference there to you to call her a wife versus a woman? Does that say anything different to you about the nature of the relationship? What does it tell you that they didn't yet have labels for pre-marriage and post-marriage the way we do? We've got bachelor, right? Bachelorette, even the labels, the Miss, Mrs., all that stuff, those change for women, not for men. But we have ways of saying before you're paired up and after, and they didn't. So they're looking at this pairing up differently than we do. They're calling it something different. they don't even have a verb that translates separately to marrying. And in fact, I have a couple charts that I created for my book, which is titled, the book is titled Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say? So I took some screenshots of those tables to put into this video so that you could see them. Let me just tell you what these charts, they're two different charts, and there's 3 screenshots to cover the first chart. And that's a chart that has, I've selected a whole bunch of passages from the Hebrew Bible where the verb that's being used in the Hebrew is the verb for to take, lakach, but the English translations all translate that instance of lakach as to marry. I have 3 different examples of that, so different contexts, right? For the same kind of, the verb take is translated as to marry. And then I have a very short chart just to show you that sometimes that same verb lakach is translated as take. And so I have some key examples of that where the lakach in the Hebrew is translated take in the English. So this first image has 3 passages from Genesis. I think the most interesting is the third one, Genesis 34:21, where the NIV says, we can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the Hebrew simply says, let us take for ourselves women and our daughters we give to them. This image has 5 passages, 2 from Leviticus, 3 from Deuteronomy, and 1 from Judges 14, verse 8, referring to Samson, which says, after a while he returned to marry her. And just like all the other passages, it simply says, to take. This image has 4 passages from the prophets. The final one is that infamous reference in Hosea chapter 1, where God tells Hosea to go take a woman of, whoredom or something, or as the NIV says, go marry a promiscuous woman. And it just says, go take for yourself a woman in the Hebrew. And this final image has 6 passages, all of which use lakach in the Hebrew and are translated as take in the English, all 6 of them. And these are key passages. My favorite is in 2 Samuel 12:9, when Nathanael approaches David and says, you've struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and have taken his wife to be your wife. And in the Hebrew it says, you have taken his woman as your woman. So you can see that it's a matter of an interpretive choice that these translation committees are bringing into the story or bringing into the scripture. What they can't help but do is bring our own current ideas about this language, marriage or marry, and read it onto them. When I look at Genesis 2, I like to do kind of deep dives with it, but I'm just going to do kind of a summary here. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, there weren't any plants yet. God took some dirt, formed a body, and breathed some life into it. A little CPR, we've got a human, alive human, but that human is not male. That human is just generic human, and that's my cat. She's going to come join us for a minute. It's time to feed her. And then we had this whole thing about, everything that God created, all the plants, everything that's good for food, all these stuff, just don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then we've got the river narration going on. And then it's like, hey, it's not really good that this human should be alone. We've got this concept, this chapter is talking about humans and our relational nature, if you will. It's not 100%, it's not a universal thing, but it's a general, almost universal thing about humans. We do kind of need community, I think, just to keep from going crazy. But in terms of wanting a life partner, that's not a universal desire. But many people, right? It's a pretty high majority. So then we get this whole, all right, then God creates all the animals, brings them in front of the human, and the human names them all. And then God takes a little bit of that first body and uses it to form a second body, enlivens that and brings it to the first, and this is man, this is woman out of man, she's taken, we've got this human, these 2 humans, this is fantastic, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones, yes. And then, therefore, a man will leave his parents and cling to his woman, and they become one flesh. This isn't about the processional down the aisle and the do you give and do you take and all this, both taking each other and all this stuff. No, this is saying something about human desire for relationship, this close, intimate relationship, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's not saying that, you have to get married before you have sex, because they didn't have a thing to designate that you're married except for having sex together, which is kind of funny. Because by that way of looking at things, if you've had sex with someone, you're technically married to them according to the Bible. We don't want to go there either. But my point is, Genesis 2:24, therefore a man leaves his parents and clings to his woman, and the two become one flesh. That's it. It's not doing a whole thing about marriage. It's talking about two people coming together. When we make the focus being about marriage between one man and one woman, as we see here, and you don't get to have sex before you do, we're really overloading, it seems to me, this passage with meaning. And it is important meaning to talk about marriage at all in any kind of way, shape, or form. I'm not denying that, right? I think we should actually be very careful about that, right? So Genesis 2:24 is used to say no sex before marriage, and marriage is, ordained by God to be between a man and a woman. And I don't see that being what Genesis 2 is trying to talk about. I see that as our agenda being placed upon it. You don't have to agree with me. See what you think. Go read it, mull these ideas over. Maybe you'll come away with a new perspective on things. That's my hope, right? All the questions are welcome, right? So I hope that's been helpful for you. See you next time.